It begins the way dreams often do, not with a bang, but a hush. You find yourself in a house that feels like memory, familiar but blunted, as if each wall has been softened by years of half-remembered evenings and the hush of things left unsaid. Outside, the world is wrapped in fog. It presses gently against the windows, not to invade, but to hold, like a soft cloth drawn over sharp edges. There's a quiet here that doesn't ask anything of you. And maybe that's what you've needed. Not a solution, not a breakthrough, just a place where you're not expected to see everything clearly all the time. Just a breath, wrapped in wool, rocking gently between heartbeat and thought. Maybe you've lived like this without even knowing it, in rooms just like this. Rooms where the lights are dim, the mirrors are muted, and the air carries a scent you can't quite place. It's not deceit. Not exactly. It's more like kindness stretched thin, a little lie told to yourself so that you could keep moving. A soft edit of the truth so that it wouldn't burn your eyes when you look too closely. What if the lies you tell yourself aren't lies at all, but lullabies, not meant to mislead, but to soothe, to rock the fragile parts of you through storms you didn't know how to name. Maybe the mind doesn't always hide things out of fear, but out of love. The fog isn't just concealment, it's cover. A quiet way of saying not yet. You're not ready. Rest first. You've protected yourself beautifully. You really have. And perhaps that's what hurts now, not the deception, but how deeply you needed it. The fog only comes when the light is too sharp. And in that way, it is a kindness, like heavy curtains drawn in a hospital room, like sunglasses on a day too bright to bear. This isn't about shame. There's no accusation in the stillness, only curiosity, a soft wondering. What parts of you have you learned not to look at? Which truths have you blurred because clarity felt too much like exposure? There's no judgment here, only recognition, because maybe you've spent years polishing certain parts of yourself so they shine just right, the version of you that others can applaud, understand, even love. But behind that, shine perhaps are quiet corners you've left untouched, rooms within you that hold the rawness of what is real. And the mind is a master architect of comfort. It will build illusions not out of malice, but survival. Not to trick you, but to protect you. Like a mother telling a bedtime story to a child too young to hear the truth. You've done what you had to do to feel safe, and that matters. Carl Rogers called it our conditions of worth, the things we learn we must be in order to be lovable. We craft ourselves accordingly, and the pieces that don't fit that mold, we tuck them into the fog, not because we're liars, but because we are tender. And the world at times has not been, so we become travelers in our own lives, walking hallways of a house we've known forever, and yet forgetting certain doors, avoiding certain mirrors, softening the edges so that we can keep going, even if it means mistaking shadows for truth. Plato said, we sit in caves, watching shadows on the wall, believing that's all there is. But what if the shadows were made by our own need for safety? What if you drew the curtain yourself, not to imprison, but to breathe? This is not about waking up with force, not about ripping away the veil. It's about something far more delicate, a noticing, a willingness, a breath that pauses before saying, maybe I could look just for a moment. And maybe that moment is now. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're not dishonest. You're simply human. And the truth is, we all carry little veils, soft coverings draped over truths that once felt too sharp to face. It's okay. You're allowed to be kind to yourself, even if that kindness came dressed as illusion. Leon Festinger called it cognitive dissonance, the tension between what we know and what we allow ourselves to admit. But tonight, this isn't theory. This is you. This is your story, spoken softly in the silence. If you've ever softened a truth just to breathe easier, you're not alone. And if this kind of stillness speaks to you, I'll be here again tomorrow. You're welcome to subscribe quietly. So just rest now. You've come far. The fog doesn't mean you're lost, only that you cared enough to hide. And as your breath begins to slow, there's a feeling that something beneath the mist still remembers the light. Not as something you must chase or force or fight for, but as something already inside you, waiting, patient, gentle. Seeing clearly isn't about tearing the fog away. It's about learning to walk through it with your eyes open, and that's where we'll begin. In the quiet, before the unraveling, you tell yourself the story again, soft and practiced, as if rehearsing for a trial that will never come. It begins, like it always does, with a shrug, a smirk, a sentence sealed tight with certainty. I didn't want that job anyway. They didn't deserve my explanation. I'm better off without them. Tiny verdicts whispered in the courtroom of your mind. A courtroom with no judge, only defense attorneys. All of them in your voice. All of them fluent in justification. This is where the psyche lives at the surface, not in bold lies, but in the artful rearrangement of truth. Not to deceive others, to soothe yourself, because somewhere deeper, just beneath the pulse, beneath the breath, something doesn't fit. You made a choice, or a choice was made for you, and now the echoes rise. The theory of cognitive dissonance says, when your actions don't match your beliefs, the mind writhes, so it bends one or the other. More often than not, the belief is what softens. Like old paper curling near a flame, you left the relationship. You said it was because you needed freedom. But wasn't there part of you still curled around the memory of their breath on your skin? You skipped the party. You said it was boring people and bad lighting. But wasn't there fear? Fear of not being the most interesting voice in the room? The reasons you reach for, they arrive dressed in logic, but they're shaped by ache, because logic is not what the mind reaches for in the quiet. It reaches for coherence. It stitches together scraps of story until the seams hold. It doesn't need them to be true. Only soothing. A friend sits across from you in a cafe, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. She's talking about her breakup. He was always distant, she says. I tried everything. I think he was afraid of commitment. I just needed more. You nod. Because you've said those words too, but there's something hollow in her smile. A hesitation in the way she lifts her eyes from the tea's steam. And you wonder, just quietly, just to yourself, was that the whole truth? Or is she protecting something fragile beneath the surface? Maybe she walked away, not because he was distant, but because he saw her too clearly. Because he asked her to be known, and she wasn't ready. Because she was scared she wasn't enough. But who could say that aloud? So we paint stories on weathered parchment. Stories that make sense of the ending. Stories that cast us in roles we can bear. The betrayed, the noble, the resilient, never the frightened, never the one who ran. You remember doing it too. After that job interview, where your voice caught and your palms sweated through the fabric, they didn't pick you. And you said, it wasn't the right fit anyway. I want something more creative. But that night alone, your stomach clenched in a quiet grief. You wanted it. You just couldn't admit that you didn't shine enough. These are the bargains we make with the ego. We trade truth for comfort, clarity for coherence. Freud named it rationalization, the mind's elegant excuse maker. But he knew, as you know now, it's not malicious. It's mercy, a way to keep moving forward without unraveling, a way to survive the moments that don't make sense, to stitch a narrative from the fray of feeling. But what if sometimes we paused between the action and the explanation, paused before the story clicked into place, and asked gently, bravely, what else might be true? It won't always be easy. The truth often comes unpolished. It might sting. It might contradict the self-image you've curated so carefully. But it also liberates. Because when you stop defending, you start listening. When you stop reaching for reasons, you start remembering. The real reason you left. The real reason you stayed. The soft, unspeakable things that shaped your choice. Sometimes the mind builds scaffolding around a wound. Words, reasons, justifications. But beneath them, the raw shape of emotion remains. Leon Festinger said the dissonance demands resolution. And often we resolve it, not by returning to the truth, but by reshaping it to fit the life we wish we lived. It's understandable, even beautiful in its way. But what does it cost? Each time we reach for a reason that isn't fully real, we move a step further from ourselves. Not in lies, but in echoes. Echoes of shame, echoes of pride, echoes of fear that we dress in rationality so they sound more noble. And yet, in the quietest moments, don't you feel it? That tug, that question, that whisper of, what if? What if the reason you gave wasn't the reason you felt? What if your mind, in its devotion to your comfort, shaped a mirror, too flattering to reflect the whole? There's nothing wrong with wanting peace, but peace built on half-truths eventually trembles. So you begin to wonder. Not everything the mind tells you is false, but not everything it tells you is whole either. You wonder about the pages you've written, the margins where the real story hides. You think about all the choices made with a quick nod, a fast reason. And now you begin to look again, not to shame yourself, not to rewrite the past, but to reclaim it. You deserve that. Because beneath the courtroom of defense, beyond the practiced statements, there's a child in you who once spoke without explanation, who felt things fully, who didn't edit the why. And maybe, just maybe, returning to that voice is the beginning of something softer. So next time you hear yourself explain, next time the words rush in to pad the fall, pause, breathe, and ask, is this the reason I reached for, or the one that reached for me? You start to see it not as deception, but as mercy. And still, a quiet ache remains what might live beneath the reasons. Let's listen gently. You remember the moment clearly, not the specifics, but the shape of it. The way your chest tightened as the decision closed in. The way your mouth said, I had no choice, like a spell, a shield, a closing door. It was easier that way. To believe the path had narrowed, that the world had made the choice for you, that you were merely a passenger on the track of necessity. We say it all the time. I had to stay. I couldn't say no. There was no other option. But if you press your ear to the wall of that sentence, you can hear the faint hum of fear. It sounds like, if I admitted I had a choice, I'd have to admit I was afraid to take it. If I said I wanted this, I'd be responsible for how it turned out. If I claim my freedom, I'd feel the weight of its consequences. Jean-Paul Sartre called it bad faith, the self-deception of pretending you are less free than you are. A lie of necessity born not of malice, but of longing for safety. Because freedom, while beautiful, is also a heavy thing. It means you could have walked away. It means you could have spoken. It means the life you're in now might be one you chose, even if unconsciously, even if in fear, even if through silence. So the psyche, clever as ever, fashions a script where you are the good child, the tireless provider, the loyal friend, the faithful partner, a character with no agency, only duty, a mask sewn from expectations. It fits snug at first, almost comforting. You play your role well. You smile on cue. You say yes. You don't flinch when your own needs go unspoken. You become the version of yourself they want to see. But over time, the mask begins to itch. It pinches at the jawline of your truth. It whispers when you wake, "This isn't me." But you pull the costume tighter, because shedding it would mean stepping out on stage with no script, no direction, just the rawness of your own voice. There was a time you sat in your car in a dark parking lot, hands on the steering wheel, the air thick with the weight of a choice you didn't want to make. You told yourself, "I can't leave." Not yet. Not with them needing you. Not with rent or guilt or tradition pressing on your spine, but in your gut, in the place that always knows there was another voice, small, steady, saying you could, and you ignored it because it felt dangerous. Because if you admitted you were free, you would also have to admit you were scared. This is the tension the ego holds. It wraps itself in obligation, in should, and must, and have to. It offers the illusion of imprisonment to escape the vulnerability of choice. But freedom is not the absence of influence. It is the presence of awareness. You can be shaped by history, by trauma, by culture, by family, and still be free to choose what to do next. Viktor Frankl knew this. Even in a concentration camp, he found the one unstealable truth, that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is your power to choose. So what roles do you wear? The tireless achiever, the peacekeeper, the martyr, the survivor. Each of them earned, each of them protective, each of them valid once, but perhaps no longer true. You were not born with them. They were stitched from necessity, in moments when becoming someone else felt safer than being yourself. But now, some of them have grown tight. They chafe at your skin. They quiet your real desires. And maybe you are allowed to take them off. Imagine a stage, a single spotlight, and costumes draped on hangers behind velvet curtains. Some still carry the scent of past performances. Some have your name written inside the collar. You step into the light, barefaced, barefoot, no lines memorized, just breath, just presence. It is terrifying and honest and yours. The lie of necessity is a kind of comfort. It lets us avoid the weight of authorship. But you are the author. You always were. That doesn't mean blame, it means power. Because when you stop saying, "I had to," you begin asking, "What do I want now? What role no longer fits? What script am I willing to rewrite?" Maybe the job you stayed in was a refuge once, but now feels like a cage. Maybe the relationship served a deep need, but now shrinks your joy. Maybe silence kept you safe, but now stifles your song. Roles are not prisons, they are performances, and every performance can end. Sometimes gently, sometimes with applause, sometimes in silence. You are not the role. You are the one who chose it, and you are free to choose again. Sartre said, freedom is a burden because it holds us accountable for our becoming. But it is also the greatest kindness because it means you are not stuck. That tightness in your chest, not fate, not duty, but a whisper. There is another way. And yes, there are walls, real ones, structural, systemic, emotional. But not all the doors are locked. Some only seem closed because we forgot to try the handle. So pause, scan your body. Which masks have become heavy? Which scripts feel rehearsed? Which I had to might have been I was afraid to. This isn't about shame. This is about awakening. It's not that your reasons were lies. They were the best you could do with what you knew. But now, you know more. Now you are brave enough to feel the tension, to sit in the ambiguity, to say, maybe I had a choice, and next time I'll choose differently, because the door might never have been locked, just waiting for you to turn the knob, to step through. Maybe the most terrifying truth is also the kindest you are free. And the echo of that word free begins to hum in your bones. You called them cold. You said they never really listened, never opened up, never made you feel wanted. And maybe that was true. Maybe they did pull away, fold into themselves when you reached. But part of you wonders, was that distance theirs alone? Or was it also your echo? The psyche protects in shadows. And one of its most delicate defenses is projection, a soft sleight of hand, where what's unbearable inside is gently, unknowingly placed upon another. You accuse the friend of always needing control, yet you never notice how tightly your own fists curl. You name your partner as emotionally distant, yet you shy from intimacy, avoiding eye contact when things get too raw. You find arrogance in others that mirrors your secret longing to be seen. It isn't conscious. It isn't cruel. It is a kind of mercy, because there are things in us we are not yet ready to hold. So the mind lifts them, fear, shame, envy, grief, and sets them down outside of us on the nearest mirror, on the face of the beloved, on the stranger who walks away too fast. You think they're so selfish. But what if that thought is the smoke of your own repressed desire to put yourself first for once? You think they're always judging me. But what if it's your own inner critic wearing someone else's mouth? This is the mirror that points away, the one that shows you a world filtered through the fog of what you cannot yet face. It's subtle, deceptive, gentle, but it distances you from truth, from the intimacy of owning what is yours. You remember the argument, the one where you raised your voice, where you said you never listen, and slammed the door, not out of anger, but out of fear. Fear that your own silence, the one you carry into every relationship, was finally showing. Later in the hush, you rehear the words, not just theirs, yours, and you realize what you saw in them was the part of you you've always tried to hide. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the unacknowledged, unloved, unmet pieces of the self. They don't vanish. They hide. Until one day, you see them walking towards you in someone else's face, and it repels you, or draws you, or stings like recognition. The stranger who annoys you. Loud brash too much might reflect the wildness in you that was punished early on. The lover who seems too needy might carry your own longings that you deem too heavy to speak aloud. So we project, we protect, and in doing so, we fracture. We build invisible walls out of accusations, defensiveness, certainty. We say they're the problem, and the mirror turns outward. But what if you turned it back? Not to blame yourself, but to reclaim. Reclaim the parts you cast off, the anger you're afraid to feel, the desire you told yourself was shameful, the hunger for love you buried beneath sarcasm. They are not flaws. They are fragments, and they want to come home. Compassion is the key. When irritation arises, pause. Ask, what part of me does this touch? What have I not welcomed within myself? Not always. Not perfectly, but more and more. This is not about excusing harm. It's about understanding pattern. Because once you see the projection, you soften. You don't need to defend so hard. You don't need to control so tightly. You don't need to exile your feelings onto someone else. You begin to witness. The cracked mirror no longer distorts. It reveals. A kaleidoscope turns, and the same shapes rearrange, showing you what you missed the first time yourself. There's a moment, quiet, in the middle of a conversation, when you hear yourself say, "They always make me feel small," and something inside halts. A breath, a pause, and the words begin to shift. Sometimes I already feel small, and being with them just reminds me. It is not an accusation. It is an invitation to tend to that smallness, to speak to it, to hold it. Projection breaks when ownership begins, when the wall becomes a mirror again, when the stranger becomes a reflection, when blame gives way to understanding. You sit with yourself, hand on heart, and whisper, "It's okay. I see it now. It was me too." The most painful part of projection is not what we see in others. It's how deeply it calls the hidden parts of us. The parts we were told were too much, too needy, too angry, too tender. But they're not too much. They are your compass. Each projection is a breadcrumb back to what needs healing. You trace them gently, compassionately, until the mirror clears, until the reflection returns, and you see not just who they are, but who you are, who you've been hiding, who is ready to return. So when the irritation rises next time, when the judgment flashes, when the story begins, pause, turn the mirror, ask the question, welcome the shadow. Because in that turning, you turn toward yourself. You gather the scattered pieces. You begin softly to come home. As the mirrors slowly turn inward, something unfamiliar stirs, not accusation, but invitation. And so we continue, deeper still. It begins with a room, silent, cold in a familiar way, the kind of cold that doesn't shock, but seeps. You're standing in the center, though you don't remember walking in. Around you, walls made of translucent fog, held in place by unseen hands. Above a ceiling of fractured stained glass, light bleeding through in shades that never quite settle on one color. Each pane tells a story, not of what happened, but what was believed to have happened, what needed to be believed. This is not a room built of facts. This is a museum of your mind, and every belief inside it once felt like truth. You approach the first exhibit, a glass box inside which spins a rusted compass. It twitches, always pointing toward what once kept you safe. safety, that warm, deceptive pull. You read the plaque beside it. I must work harder to be enough. It's not dramatic, not loud, but it's etched deep. You remember when this one was installed, though not clearly. It arrived when praise was sparse, when silence filled the spaces where comfort might have lived. It was shaped not by logic, but by need. Need to explain why the affection you craved came in crumbs. So your mind, efficient and aching, offered a reason. Maybe if I try more, give more, fix more. And thus, a belief was born, not because it was true, but because it helped the world make sense. You keep walking. Each belief here feels like a shard of you. Each one has been worn smooth by repetition, confirmation, familiarity. That's the thing they never came labeled as belief. They whispered as reality. Inherited from culture caretakers, half-heard sermons, schoolyards, and screenlight. You pause before a stained glass panel, blues and golds framing an image of two people smiling with practiced grace. A family portrait, yet the eyes are mirrors. You look into them and see echoes of old scripts. You don't talk about that. That didn't happen like you think. You're too sensitive. And so, truth twisted, not maliciously, but habitually. Protection dressed as denial. Love wrapped in gaslight. A generation raised by the generation before, each one carrying unspoken grief like it was sacred. You learned not what was real, but what was permitted. You learned how to survive in a house where silence was safer than truth. Confirmation bias. The museum's architect wasn't a flaw. It was survival. Your mind, like all minds, curated data that affirmed what it already believed. It filtered memories, avoided dissonance, rearranged logic like a stagehand in the dark. Because questioning the story meant destabilizing the self. And sometimes it's easier to live in a coherent lie than a chaotic truth. You reach a long corridor. On either side, windows but fogged. Behind them, you can make out shelves, a vast library, each book a belief. Some titles shine, others crumble. You pull one from the shelf. Success means being chosen. You open it. Pages filled with memories that reinforce the idea. Applause awards, approvals. Moments you felt worthy because someone else said you were. The book doesn't lie. It simply omits what doesn't fit. The nights you wept unnoticed. The times you felt whole alone, yet dismissed those moments because they didn't match the theme. Another book catches your eye. I'm broken. You hesitate. This one is heavy. You remember carrying it everywhere even when your hands were full. You remember how people reinforced it subtly, unintentionally. How certain experiences seemed to prove it. But flip far enough through the pages and contradictions emerge. Joy, compassion, strength, the cracks in the story. Nietzsche once wrote, "There are no facts, only interpretations." You didn't choose that quote, it found you. Or maybe you were ready to hear it. And now, as you look around this museum, you understand beliefs aren't mirrors. They're paintings, rendered with emotional brushstrokes lit by culture's lamp. They reflect more of need than neutrality. Even your identity, your name, your traits, this is just who I am. They aren't fixed. They're collages. You absorbed fragments of language, culture, gender roles, media echoes. Someone once told you, "You're so independent," and you kept it. Another said, "You're too much," and you swallowed that too. Over time, those fragments hardened into self. But what if the self isn't a solid? What if it's smoke shaped by wind? A low hum rises from the floor. It vibrates through your souls, soft but insistent. It sounds like a question, though no words form, only the feeling. What do you believe that you've never questioned? The hum gets louder near a sculpture at the room's end. It's abstract, ever-shifting in impossible geometry of glass and shadow. At certain angles, it looks like hope. At others, shame. You read the inscription carved into its base. Beliefs are not lies. They're scaffolding. You exhale. Scaffolding. Temporary structures. Necessary, but not permanent. They held you up when you were too tender to hold yourself. They gave form to chaos, meaning to pain. They let you move forward when everything else said stop. Not wrong, just incomplete. You think back to the times you clung to beliefs like lifeboats. They're unchangeable. It's my fault. If I lose them, I'll fall apart. Maybe you needed to believe that then. But now you begin to feel the architecture shifting. You place your hand on the sculpture. It pulses as if recognizing you, as if waiting. And in that stillness, a truth gentle and strange arises. What you believe shapes what you see. But not all that is seen must be believed. You pull back. The museum begins to dim. The fog at the windows lifts slightly. Not enough to see clearly, but enough to know there's more beyond. Some exhibits flicker. Some shelves tremble, as if reconsidering their contents. And suddenly it's quiet. Not silence as loneliness, but silence as invitation. The kind that makes room for something new. You step toward the exit. And as you step beyond the last exhibit, the silence grows honest. The old maps helped, until they didn't. And now, maybe it's time to draw your own. The story that thinks it's you. You're not walking anymore. You're floating. Or maybe you're being carried by thought, by memory, by something quieter than either. The museum behind you fades into the mist, and in its place, a river appears. Not roaring, not calm, just constant. You're on its banks now, barefoot in shifting sand. The water reflects no sky, no trees, only you. But even that isn't quite right. What it reflects shifts each time you look. A child, a stranger, a mask, a memory, and then nothing at all. You take a breath. The air here feels loose, as if even oxygen hasn't made up its mind. And in this looseness, something inside you begins to question. Who are you really? Not your name, not your job, not your role at the dinner table, or the way you laugh when you're nervous. Not the traits you list on forms, or the hobbies you mention when someone asks, "What do you like to do?" Those are costumes, rehearsed, expected. Strip them away. Who's left? You close your eyes and feel yourself unraveling, not painfully, but gently, like threads loosening from a tightly wound ball. Each thread a memory, each memory a narrative, and each narrative a construction. You see the time someone called you strong, and you wore it like armor. The time someone said too sensitive, and you tried to mute your heart. You see how often you've narrated your life in third person, turning pain into plot joy, into summary. This happened because I'm this kind of person. They did that because I always, or just often enough to write a story around it. The voice in your head, the one that narrates your every move, it's so familiar, you've forgotten it's not you. It's a storyteller, a script writer, drawing from memory trauma, desire culture, all in the service of coherence. And coherence, it turns out, is comforting, even when the story hurts. But what if the story isn't true. You wade into the river. It's cold, but not unkind. Each step dissolves something you thought was solid, a label, a pattern, a belief. You glance down. The name tags are floating. One by one, they release daughter, partner, smart, failure, funny, complicated, not enough, too much. They dissolve on contact with the water. You try to hold one worthy, but even that slips through your fingers. The river doesn't care what you've been told. It only knows movement. Heraclitus whispers from somewhere upstream. You cannot step into the same river twice. And suddenly, you see it. The self is not a statue. It's a process, a becoming, not fixed, but flowing. You remember how as a child, you didn't ask, "Who am I?" You simply were. You danced when music played. You cried when you were hurt. You didn't need to justify joy. You didn't need a reason to rest. And then the layers came. Language, identity, categories. You learned to describe yourself to fit into forms, expectations, templates. You became a resume, a pattern of behaviors, a reliable set of reactions. The world needed you to be someone, and so you complied. But now, maybe you wonder, what if the self is less like a statue and more like a flame always flickering, always alive? You feel it now, that flicker, not in your thoughts, but beneath them, not in your body, but through it. A presence, a softness, not a fixed identity, but a space, spaciousness. Buddhists call it a not a non-self, not in the sense of nothingness, but freedom from the illusion of solidity. You don't disappear. You're not erased. You're unhooked from the story that claimed you. The neuroscientists agree there's no single place in the brain labeled self. No glowing core that says, "This is me." Just circuits, patterns, distributed processes, flickers of thought arising and falling like ripples on the river. Dan McAdams says the self is a story we tell to make meaning, but sometimes stories trap us. Sometimes they don't evolve. And you are allowed to evolve. So you ask again, who are you when no one's watching? Who are you when there's nothing to prove? The water cradles your knees now. You think of the roles you've performed so well. The caretaker, the achiever, the rebel, the invisible one, the peacemaker. Each role came with its own script. Some earned applause, others earned survival, but all of them temporary. You whisper each one like a goodbye, and then silence. You feel something else, a pulse, not a word, not an answer, just you unstoried. Not erasing your past, but stepping beyond it. It doesn't feel like certainty. It feels like openness, a softness you had forgotten you could be. You breathe in that softness, and you begin to laugh, not loudly, but with the quiet amusement of someone realizing they've been searching for their glasses while wearing them. The you you've been trying to become isn't somewhere else. It's not a better version waiting at the end of some self-improvement plan. It's the you that exists when trying stops, when striving softens, when the performance dissolves. It's strange, isn't it? How being nothing can feel so much like being whole. The current tugs at you gently, as if asking, "Are you ready to keep moving?" You nod. You don't need to know what's next. You're not a noun anymore. You're a verb, a becoming, a wave in the river, a breath before the name. And beneath each name, you've worn something quieter remains. Not a self, but a softness. Not a fact, but a presence. The river narrows until it's just a stream, then a trail of dew across your feet, and then it's gone. You stand on cracked earth now, warm, brittle, echoing with the distant hush of wings. Above you, a sky without color. Not empty, but muted, like a song remembered in pieces. You walk. The horizon doesn't move. Ahead, a structure. At first glance, it looks like a sculpture. But the closer you come, the more it reveals itself. Bars, hinges, locks, a cage, rusted, delicate, beautiful in the way old sorrow is beautiful, and inside a shape. You lean closer. It's a bird. No, not a bird. You, a younger you, knees tucked to chest, back against the far corner of the cage, arms wrapped tight, breathing shallow, eyes open but unfocused, not asleep, not awake, just waiting. You reach out, fingers grazing the bars. They're warm, feather-lined, familiar. This cage wasn't forced on you. You made it, not on purpose, not with joy, but with need. Back then, it wasn't a prison. It was safety. When chaos raged and nothing made sense, this cage gave shape to pain. It turned confusion into rules, hurt into logic, fear into a plan. You remember the first bar you welded, "I'm unlovable." You didn't want it. But the ache of not understanding why you were left or hurt or overlooked, that ache needed something to hold on to. So the belief arrived. Precise. Sharp. It gave reason to the unreasonable. And then it began to filter everything. A friend cancels plans evidence. Someone forgets your birthday confirmation. A moment of intimacy suspicion. Love offered mistrust. The belief became a lens, and the lens became a law. You stopped noticing anything that contradicted it. Your mind, so elegant, so loyal, protected the narrative at all costs. It activated the schema. It silenced the exception. You kept collecting bars. If I succeed, they'll stay. If I'm small enough, I won't be hurt. If I expect nothing, I can't be disappointed. And so the cage grew. Feather-lined, yes, but stifling. Its comfort came at a cost. You kneel now, face to face with the younger you. They look up startled, not by your presence, but by your gentleness. They whisper, "Is it safe out there?" You want to answer. But the truth is, you don't know. Out there is unpredictable. Pain happens. Loss is real. But so is joy. So is freedom. So is love that doesn't ask you to shrink. You press your forehead to the bars, and for the first time, you hear them creak, not snap, not shatter, just shift. Beliefs rarely break in drama. They loosen in stillness. You remember something van der Kolk once said, "Trauma doesn't just haunt the mind. It lives in the body, in muscle, in breath, in posture, and in the beliefs the body builds to make sense of what it could not escape." You inhale. You think of all the moments you repeated the old belief, not because it was true, but because it was familiar. Because changing it meant grieving the time you spent living inside it. But what if grief is the beginning of freedom? What if healing doesn't mean becoming someone new, but allowing who you are to stretch beyond the cage you stand? The air thickens charged. Around you, other cages begin to appear. Dozens, hundreds, each one housing a different belief. Some are empty now, some still occupied. I must earn rest. They'll leave if I show the real me. I can't trust my feelings. I always mess it up. This is just who I am. No one stays. Each belief, a bar. Each bar, an old defense. Each defense, once a gift of survival. But you are surviving less now and becoming more. You turn back to the first cage. The door was never locked, but it takes time to remember how to open what you closed yourself. You reach for the handle. Your hands tremble. You don't force it. You sit, and you begin to speak to the younger you, to the belief, to the silence that once replaced comfort. You say, I believed you because I needed to. I lived inside you because the world outside didn't feel safe. I thank you. And now, I'm wondering what it would feel like to loosen, not reject, not destroy, just loosen. The handle softens in your grip. You push. The door creaks open. The child you hesitates. You wait. This isn't about forcing anything. This is about presence. And after a moment, they crawl forward. Eyes wide, body small. They press their palm to yours. And for the first time, you remember you were never meant to live inside a belief. You were meant to live. You carry them now. Out of the cage, into the open air. The sky above isn't colorless anymore. There's a hint of blue, a suggestion of light. You look around. The other cages begin to sigh, as if exhaling their hold. None of them disappear, but something changes. Their walls grow transparent, and inside each one, a version of you begins to stir. This is the slow work, the gentle unraveling, the moment-to-moment return to yourself, because belief unexamined becomes a prison. But belief softened by love becomes a door, and the cage doesn't shatter. It creaks. It sighs. It slowly forgets how to hold you, because maybe you were never small enough to fit inside. You were so small when it first happened, too small to name the thing, but not too small to feel it. The shift, the silence, that subtle cooling of the room, not because the temperature dropped, but because something in the air changed when you spoke the truth. Maybe your voice was bright with discovery or trembling with sadness. Maybe it was just a question, small, honest, naked in its need, but the reply came like a closed door, a glance too long on something else, a sigh that said, not now, words that folded your moment into a lesson. And in that tiny pivotal space, your body understood what your mind could not. Some truths are unwelcome. Some feelings arrive too loudly. And to keep the warmth, you would have to shrink. You did not lie. No, not yet. But you learned. You learned to hold things back. The wonder, the ache, the sting of disappointment, like marbles clutched inside a too small palm. You tucked them behind your ribs where no one could see. You did it out of love. That's the part that still aches, maybe. You quieted your truth, not because you wanted to deceive, but because you wanted to stay close. You learned to laugh before you felt the joy. You nodded before you understood. You made yourself smaller, smoother, simpler, because the world around you responded better to that version. You saw how certain expressions opened arms and others closed them. You studied the code, adapted with brilliance, 1,000 tiny recalibrations, not to manipulate, but to belong. There was a time, not so long after, when you stood behind the curtain. Not metaphorically, a literal curtain. Fabric heavy with dust and forgotten sun, thick enough to soften sound. You stood there because your voice had faltered in the kitchen. You tried to show something, a drawing maybe, or a collection of rocks, and the air had turned sharp. Not now, they'd said. Or worse, they didn't say anything at all. And so you retreated, but you didn't cry. Not yet. You simply stood, with the paper still warm in your hand, as the light dappled the floor, and the dust danced, and time passed. And inside, something folded. A delicate origami of self pressed into smaller and smaller shapes, until it fit behind silence, until it could vanish just enough to be safe. No one taught you this, not out loud, but you learned all the same. That need was risky. That joy could be inconvenient. That being fully you sometimes caused people to look away. So you carved off slivers, offered the acceptable parts, and kept the rest beneath the surface. This is not a failure. This is not shameful. This is the intelligence of the nervous system, the wisdom of the child. To preserve attachment, to preserve love, you adapted. You became what the moment required. It was not deception. It was a kind of prayer, a shape-shifting ritual of survival that said, "Keep me close, let me stay." And in the spaces where you once reached out, you began to reach in. You became your own witness, the one who held the crumpled drawing, the one who said quietly, "Maybe next time." You did this with courage beyond measure. And over time, the performance became habit. The habit became identity. Until even you began to forget what the drawing looked like. Secure love, the kind that mirrors you gently and consistently, is a rare soil. And maybe you didn't grow in it. Maybe your roots searched through sand and stone for something steady. And maybe instead of finding it, you made do. You wrapped around what was there. You turned toward the sun of approval, even if it burned. You bent toward kindness, even when it was rare. You learned to bloom under conditional skies. Some children become louder. They chase the love cry harder, demand to be seen. Others become quiet. They withdraw, convinced that need is the problem. Some flutter between both anxious and avoidant, a push-pull dance they don't understand. But all of them are simply trying to stay attached. Because to the child, connection is not optional. It is life. And you, in your own way, did exactly what you had to do. You made yourself safe. You carved out a version of yourself that would be accepted. You smiled when it hurt. You nodded when confused. You wore masks, not because you were false, but because the naked face went unheld too many times. And still, somewhere in you, that first version lingers. The one behind the curtain, the one holding the drawing, the one who believed that showing what's real should bring closeness, not distance. That small, you still waits, not for applause, not for correction, but for someone to say, "I see it. I see you." And it matters. Sometimes, even now, your body remembers. A tightness in the throat when you speak too honestly. A tremble in the stomach when someone looks at you too long. The sudden urge to explain yourself, apologize, smooth things over. These are echoes, not flaws. They are the shadows of that first hiding place. The ones you built out of necessity and carried into adulthood like a second skin. You might wonder why it still hurts. Why the old feelings linger long past the moments that caused them. But the truth is, it wasn't just a moment. It was the blueprint, the map you built your inner world upon. And it's hard to redraw a map when you've walked it for so long. But here you are standing again at the edge of the curtain. And the light, can you see it? It's different now. You are older, softer, stronger. You are not frozen. You are not alone. And maybe, just maybe, you are ready to hold the drawing again. Not to show it for approval, not to fix it, just to remember what you once made in all its color and imperfection, and to let it be real. What if your self-deception was never about dishonesty? What if it was about love, the kind that tried to keep the people you needed close, the kind that whispered, "Don't show too much, they might leave"? And what if now love can look different? Maybe you don't have to hide behind the curtain anymore. Maybe the sob doesn't need to be swallowed. Maybe the truth in its trembling, awkward glory is safe with you now. And behind that curtain, you stayed until the hiding became you. But now, the fabric feels thinner. Light seeps through. It didn't happen all at once. No clear line, no sudden rupture, just the slow, quiet layering. A glance that told you to adjust, a tone that warned be smaller, a gesture that meant don't make this harder than it has to be. So you complied. Not out of fear always, but out of something more tender. A hope, a longing, a deep-rooted instinct to keep the threads intact, the ones that tethered you to safety. And the first time you put it on the mask felt strange, heavy, too large, like wearing someone else's skin. But over time, it molded to you, or you molded to it. Hard to say. It became easier to smile than to ask, easier to make a joke than to cry, easier to say it's fine than to risk the confusion that might follow truth. So you smiled. You performed. You became charming, careful, competent, or maybe quiet, invisible, untouchable. Whatever brought the least resistance. Whatever earned you the most love or the least pain. You didn't mean to forget who you were. It just happened. Because the longer you wore it, the more it fit. And the more it fit, the more it was praised. You're so mature. You're so easy. You're so strong. Words that sounded like love, but tasted like exile. They didn't see what it cost. How the laughter was practiced. How the silence was a shield. How the calm exterior held back a storm of unsaid things. You learned not just to wear the mask, you learned to become it. To the point where even you began to wonder if there was anything underneath. There was. There is. But the mask, oh, it's clever. It's not made of lies. It's made of truths that were allowed. Pieces of you that the world welcomed, wrapped tightly around the pieces it didn't. It became armor, persona, identity, and over the years, it fused with the skin. Not because you were false, but because you were so good at surviving. And maybe there were moments when it cracked, when someone looked too closely, when the weight became too much, when something spontaneous slipped through a laugh too loud, a need too urgent, a grief too sharp. And afterward, the scramble patch. The crack, reapply the mask, smooth the surface. No one must see what's underneath. Not because it's ugly, but because it feels unprotected. You became an expert in your own concealment. A sculptor of selves, applying layers of polish, adjusting tone and gesture and posture. At school, you were one version. At home, another. In friendship, in love, in conflict, each space required a different shape. And you learned them all with exquisite precision. It wasn't deception. It was devotion. You gave the world what it needed, what it demanded, what it applauded. And somewhere along the way, the inner voice that once whispered, "But what about me?" began to fade. Until maybe you stopped hearing it altogether. There is grief in that, not just for the things lost, but for the things never allowed. The chaos, the hunger, the awkwardness, the unfiltered joy, the messy, unedited, inconvenient truth of who you might have been if no one ever taught you to adapt. The child who might have laughed with their mouth full, who might have cried in public, who might have said no and meant it, but you didn't fail. You survived. You found a way to exist in a world that often demanded performance over presence. And the mask, heavy though it is, protected you from rejection, from ridicule, from abandonment. Can we bless it just for a moment, not tear it off, not throw it away, but place a hand on its surface and say thank you. Thank you for getting me here, for carrying what I could not yet carry alone, for holding the line when my voice felt too small. You don't have to hate the mask to take it off. You don't have to destroy it to outgrow it. What if the mask wasn't a mistake, but a marvel, a brilliant creative adaptation to a world that didn't always welcome the rawness of your truth. A gift you gave yourself to keep the child within you safe until someone maybe you could finally say, it's safe now. You can be real. It might feel strange the first time you try, like peeling paint, like walking barefoot after years in armor. The wind touches places you forgot existed. The silence rings louder. You might stumble, flinch, want to run back to the familiar safety of the mask. That's okay. It's not about ripping it away. It's about loosening its grip, gently, with reverence. Bit by bit, you might start by noticing, when do I smile but feel sadness? When do I say yes but mean no? When do I explain myself before I've even been questioned? These moments are not failures. They're doorways, clues, invitations to return. To what? To the self underneath. The one that never disappeared, only waited. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as speaking a truth and staying. Sitting with discomfort and not filling it with noise. Letting yourself be seen, not for what you do, but for what you feel. And yes, it's terrifying. Because the mask came from necessity. It came from moments when the real you wasn't met with gentleness. It came from knowing that honesty sometimes leads to silence, to withdrawal, to anger. And you learned wisely to adapt. But adaptation is not identity. It's survival. And survival is not the same as aliveness. Somewhere in you, a truer voice waits. One not made of performance, but presence. One that doesn't need to earn love because it remembers love isn't something to earn. It's something to receive. And maybe it will take time to untangle the mask from the skin, to remember what you sound like when you're not adjusting, to trust that what's underneath is not too much, not too broken, not too anything, just you. You are not a role, not a task, not a sum of accomplishments or impressions. You are not the shell that kept you safe. You are the life inside it. And when you begin to soften, to unmask, you may feel fragile. But fragility is not weakness. It is the sign of new growth, of thawing, of remembering. Let it be slow. Let it be clumsy. Let it be yours. You wore the mask long enough. And maybe it's time to breathe through your own skin. And maybe the weight you carry isn't your soul, but the shell it once needed. What happens if we set it down? You wanted to be seen. You still do. Not noticed. Not evaluated. Not corrected. Seen as in held in someone's gaze, without judgment or agenda. Known without needing to perform. Loved without needing to explain. And it's strange how rare that is. How even in rooms full of people, your heart can feel like it's pressing its face to a window, waving from behind the glass, hoping someone will look. Really look. There was a time when you tried, with your whole being. You showed up with outstretched hands, eyes wide, words tumbling. You brought your questions, your excitement, your sadness. You brought your mess, and what met you wasn't cruelty, not always. Sometimes it was just emptiness, a distracted nod, a misread expression, a quick fix, a closed door, when what you needed was a lap to climb into, and a voice that said, "Tell me everything." It didn't feel like trauma, not in the ways people usually speak of it. There were no sirens, no loud crashes, just a subtle, repeated ache, like reaching for a hand that never quite reaches back. Micro moments, misattunements, glitches in the emotional mirror. You said, "I'm sad," and someone said, "You're fine." You said, "Look what I made," and someone said, "Why is it so messy?" You said nothing at all, and no one asked why. And so slowly, invisibly, you stopped saying. But the longing didn't stop. You still wanted to be seen. You just stopped expecting it to happen. Instead, you began to see others deeply. You attuned. You listened. You anticipated. You became the one who noticed moods, remembered preferences, avoided stepping on emotional landmines. You became excellent at reading the room, because once upon a time, no one read you. And inside, the ache remained. It's not just the pain of what was done. It's the pain of what was missed. The birthday not remembered in the right way. The bedtime story read without looking up. The applause that never came because you stopped trying to impress. The disappointment that was never named, so it turned inward. Some children respond by disappearing, others by overachieving. Some become caretakers, some rebels. But under it all is the same pulse. If I cannot be loved for who I am, maybe I can be loved for what I do. And so begins the slow, subtle exile of the authentic self. The child disappears behind performance protection perfection, and the adults call it maturity. But what it really is grief. Grief for the unmirrored parts, the anger that wasn't allowed, the joy that felt too loud, the tenderness that met ridicule. You began to wonder, am I too much or not enough? And without answers, those questions became truths. They calcified into beliefs, core stories, ones that echo still. I must not burden others. If I fail, I lose love. My feelings are inconvenient. I have to earn my place. These are not thoughts, they are templates. They shape the way you walk into rooms, hold your posture, choose your words. They guide the way you interpret silence. They explain why intimacy sometimes feels like a test you're bound to fail. But these stories were never true. They were only responses. Responses to being unseen, misread, neglected in small, consistent ways that taught you to doubt your own reflection. And yet you kept going. That's the miracle. You kept trying. You formed attachments, reached out, created art, told jokes, found ways to express what couldn't be said. You built inner worlds where your full self could breathe. Secret diaries, imaginary friends, late-night whispers to the dark. You are not broken. You are adaptive, sensitive, deep. Not because you're flawed, but because you've spent a lifetime feeling the spaces where connection failed to meet you. And still, you want to connect. That's the part that humbles, the part that shines. You want to be seen, but seen accurately, not as a projection, not as a role, not as a reflection of someone else's need. You want someone to look at you and say, yes, I see the fear and the strength. I see the mess and the magic. I see all of it, and it's not too much. You've seen glimpses, maybe in a friend's eyes, in a quiet moment with a stranger, in the way someone once remembered something small about you, something you didn't even think they noticed. These glimpses are nourishment. They keep you searching. And maybe now you're beginning to realize the one who must see you first is you. Not the masked self, not the performing self, but the soft, unsure feeling one underneath. The one who still flinches, still hopes, still presses its hand to the glass. Can you turn toward that child now? Can you sit with them without fixing? Can you read the invisible ink in their diary? The pages that say, please look at me even if I can't look at myself. Because the truth is, you were never too much. You were never not enough. You were just unseen. at a time when your reflection was still forming, and that absence bent the mirror. But now you can hold the glass steady. You can say, I see you, even if your voice shakes, even if your eyes brim, even if it takes time, and it will take time, to rebuild what was never built, to believe what was never told, to feel what was once too dangerous to feel. But beneath the ache is something sacred, the longing to be known, not just accepted, to be met, not just tolerated, to be loved not for your usefulness, but for your essence. And longing, my love is life. It is the proof that something inside you still reaches for light, still believes in the possibility of warmth, still carries the blueprint of a connection that didn't happen but could, still holds the memory of a love that would never turn away. You are not the stories you were told. You are not the reflections that failed to reflect. You are not the ache, you are the one who feels it, witnesses it, breathes through it. And breath like light can reach even the rooms that were locked for decades. So breathe now, not to fix, not to push, just to make space. For the child still waving, for the soul still shining, for the parts of you still waiting to be seen. And even now, the ache lingers, but so does the longing. And where there's longing, there's still life. You wake with the alarm, but you rise with the performance. The light outside your window is soft, still undecided. But your body remembers how to move, how to show up, how to arrange the face. There is a smile somewhere inside your muscles, sewn like an old hymn, ready to be pulled forward at command. You don't even have to think about it. It's stitched in now. A practiced curve, a learned reflex. And so it appears. In the mirror, on your screen, across the breakfast table. A smile that isn't false, not exactly, but not quite yours either. It's the one that says, I'm good. I've got this. I'm fine, even when you're not. You've worn it so long, it almost feels like skin. There is a name for this, though names rarely soothe. The persona, the social mask, the smooth, polished self you present to the world. It's not a lie exactly. It's a strategy, a soft armor custom-tailored for the culture you move through. It protects you, gains approval, deflects concern. And it's so convincing, so complete, that sometimes even you forget it isn't the whole of who you are. But beneath that mask, something hums, quietly, waiting. Because even a silk-lined mask leaves a mark. Even the most elegant smile strains the muscles. Even the brightest persona casts a shadow. You walk through your day, wearing this curated expression, offering pieces of yourself like business cards. How are you? You're asked. And out comes the automatic answer, good. Or busy, but good. Or hanging in. Words that slide across the surface of your life like water over glass, never touching the depth of the feeling underneath. Not because you're dishonest, but because the truth feels like too much. Too much for the moment. Too much for the room. Too much for the version of you they've come to expect. And so, the smile stays, polished, in place. At work, you carry it like a credential. In meetings, it helps you pass as composed, competent, unfazed. At dinner, it keeps the conversation light, the mood safe. Even online, where there are filters for everything but exhaustion. You know exactly how to craft the caption, tweak the tone, tilt the camera. You've become fluent in what is welcome, what is rewarded. You've learned how to make discomfort look like grace, how to hint at struggle in a way that garners admiration, not unease. There's an art to it, really. The the gentle violence of constant self-editing. And it is violence, soft, invisible, socially sanctioned. You learn to amputate your own complexity before someone else does it for you. You become a curator of palatable emotions, smiling through meetings, smiling through grief, smiling through conflict, panic, dissonance. You smooth the edges before they snag anyone else. You tuck the mess away before it becomes contagious. Because no one wants too much. No one wants to see you crack. No one wants the truth that doesn't resolve by the end of a paragraph. And so the smile becomes a border, not just a signal. It keeps others comfortable, but it also keeps you contained. Somewhere in the long hallway of your day, you catch your own reflection, not just in glass, but in tone, in how often you say yes, in how often you say no problem when there is a problem, in how you pivot, edit, shrink, soften in order to fit a space that was never shaped for your whole self. And maybe in that moment something flickers. A flicker like breath held too long. A flicker like a whisper beneath the applause. A flicker like your true self pressing its hands against the inside of the mask. Because the truth is, you are not fine, not all the time, and you don't need to be. But the mask, the smile, has become so familiar, so rehearsed, that removing it now feels like a rupture, a risk, a confession. What if they don't recognize you without it? What if you don't recognize you? There's a particular ache that comes from being celebrated for the version of you that isn't whole. A strange loneliness, applause that echoes but doesn't land. Compliments that float through your body without finding a home. You've become the smile. But what lives beneath it? There's a tiredness there. Not physical exactly. More like a soul fatigue. The exhaustion of never arriving, not really in your own life. Of being almost honest, almost comfortable, almost free. And yet, you keep smiling. Because the alternative, the pause, the rawness, the real still feels too naked, too unfiltered. You imagine their discomfort, their confusion. You imagine the gap that would open between you and the roles you play. And so, you edit again. Even when you cry, it's contained. Even when you ache, you explain. Even when you long, you do it beautifully. But beauty isn't the same as truth, and approval isn't the same as being known. You remember moments scattered sacred when someone looked past the mask. When someone asked, "How are you really?" and waited. When silence was allowed. When the edges of your pain weren't rushed, weren't fixed, weren't folded into something more digestible. And in those moments, your body exhaled in a way it hadn't for years. Because to be seen, truly, is to be allowed. And maybe you've forgotten what that feels like. The persona is not your enemy. It's a child of adaptation. It was born to protect you, to help you belong. But now, it keeps you circling the periphery of your own life, waving at others from behind glass. You smile, and they smile back, and the world keeps turning. But beneath that rotation, something inside you longs to slow, to soften, to stop performing wellness and simply be, to frown if you're frowning, to cry if you're grieving, to sit in silence without narrating it away. Because real doesn't always look graceful, healing isn't always photogenic, and love, real love, will never require the mask. So maybe tonight, just for now, you let the smile rest, not as rejection, but as reunion, not as rebellion, but as return. The face beneath is still yours, tired maybe, soft definitely, but still whole, still worthy, and still here. even without the smile, and the smile stays even as the mouth softens. But now, perhaps the face beneath is ready to breathe again. There's a hallway you walk every day, though you don't always know you're in it. It begins when you open your device, when you scroll, when you swipe, when you search. A flicker of curiosity turns into a stream of answers. Tailored, targeted, tidy. It feels like discovery, but something quieter knows. It's more like a loop. This hallway is lined with mirrors, not the kind that show you how you look, the kind that show you what you believe. They reflect your thoughts back to you one by one, until belief becomes echo, and echo becomes reality. You say something, once, out loud online in search, and the walls begin to hum with agreement. The algorithm listens, remembers, repeats, not maliciously, not even consciously, but with precision. Every time you return, the hallway has narrowed. Fewer doors, more reflections, more versions of yourself agreeing with each other. You didn't mean to build a chamber, but it feels so safe here. This is the comfort of curation, the calm of confirmation, a sense of being right, not just occasionally, but constantly. The edges of doubt soften, contradictions blur. What once was question becomes certainty, and certainty becomes identity. And identity is addictive. You feel it in the pulse of every scroll, the momentary relief of seeing your thoughts mirrored back, the gentle nod of the digital world, whispering, yes, this too. Yes, you're correct. Yes, you're one of us. And who isn't tired of doubting? But something inside you wonders what happens when the echo gets louder than the truth. Because the truth, unlike confirmation, is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't trend. It doesn't interrupt your feed to congratulate you. Truth waits. And often it's inconvenient. Sometimes it lives in contradiction. Sometimes it shows up wearing the clothes of someone you've been told not to trust. Sometimes it sounds like a question that doesn't resolve in one sentence. But in the echo chamber, complexity becomes the enemy, nuance a threat, opposition betrayal. The hallway rewards clarity, even if it's shallow. It punishes uncertainty, even if it's honest. So you learn to curate, to filter, to refine your opinions into palatable shapes, to surround yourself with voices that agree, not because you're arrogant, but because disagreement feels like danger now, as if being wrong means being unloved. And so the hallway narrows again. A voice speaks, yours perhaps, or one you follow. It says something with confidence, a bold statement, a quick judgment, a moral certainty, and instantly it's echoed, shared, liked, loved. That voice becomes louder, more stable, and soon it becomes you. Not because you chose it with depth, but because it was repeated often enough to feel familiar. You start to forget what it's like to hold opposing thoughts in the same hand, to wonder, to be unsure, to be quiet in the presence of a view that isn't your own. You forget how to listen without editing, because listening now feels like vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like losing ground. But something in you still remembers the hunger not for certainty, but for truth. The kind of truth that doesn't need applause, that doesn't care about the algorithm, that doesn't bend to trends or tribal approval. The kind that humbles you, that softens you, that asks you to learn. It's hard to find in the hallway, because the hallway was designed to keep you moving in one direction. Every click is a vote. Every like is a brick. Every share a wall. And you are the architect, not in guilt, but in habit. not in malice, but in momentum. You follow what feels good. You double tap what makes you feel seen. You engage with what stirs you, affirms you, validates you, until the hallway no longer reflects the world, only your version of it. And then you start to feel a quiet loneliness. Not because you're alone, you are in fact surrounded, but because you're not sure anymore if anyone is telling you the truth or just telling you what you already believe. You start to notice how rare it is to change your mind, how rarely you hear the full story, how often the loudest voice wins, not the wisest. It begins to ache, not in your thoughts, but deeper, in your sense of self, in your longing to grow. Because growth doesn't echo, it disrupts. It comes like a stranger into your hallway and says something unexpected, something unpopular, something true. And your first impulse is to delete it, unfollow, unfriend, mute, because discomfort feels personal now. But what if it's an invitation? What if that discomfort is not a threat, but a door? The hallway wants you to stay, but your soul wants to explore, to step into rooms where people don't agree, to sit with ideas that stretch you, to meet humans, not just handles, to feel, again, not just react. Because deep down, you don't want to win the argument. You want to understand the human. You want to remember that everyone is more than their posts. That silence isn't always agreement. That love survives disagreement. You want to know how to listen again, not just scan for validation. To hear someone say, "I don't see it that way," and instead of defending you, inhale. You consider. You soften. Because the world isn't supposed to echo. It's supposed to sing. And harmony only happens when different notes meet. Even your own voice is more layered than you've let it be. There are parts of you that haven't spoken in years. Parts of you that doubt the narrative, that long for less certainty, more wonder. You've hidden them for safety, for simplicity, for cohesion, but they're still here, waiting, just outside the hallway, waiting for the moment you pause the scroll, the click, the nod, and ask, is this still true? Is this still me? Is this still whole? You don't have to abandon yourself to find truth. You just have to widen the room. Let in the strange, the quiet, the contradictory, the new. Let your feed be less flattering, more honest. Let your ideas be less fixed, more curious. You are not your echo. You are the space that hears it and wonders what's beyond. And maybe the hallway isn't a trap. Maybe it's just a phase, a room you wandered into and forgot to leave. You can leave, not all at once, not with a grand declaration, but with a question, a breath, a moment of unknowing. That's all it takes to crack the mirror. And once cracked, it begins to fade, not into chaos, but into clarity. Because truth, real truth, doesn't hide in loops. It lives in the spaces where your assumptions stretch, where your heart is still soft, where your mind still asks. And maybe that's enough. Even in the loudest echo, silence waits. And maybe, just maybe, the quiet holds more truth than the noise. There comes a moment, perhaps small, almost forgettable, when you don't laugh at the joke. Not because you're trying to prove anything, not because you're angry, but because it isn't true for you. Not anymore. The room stays light, but you feel it, the weight of not joining in. A choice so subtle it slips past language. A micro rebellion. A quiet return. This is how it begins, not with fire, but with a breath that refuses to lie. Because after all the roles, all the rules, all the rewards, Something in you starts to notice the cost, the price of belonging when it's built on silence, the price of success when it's fueled by self-betrayal, the price of being agreeable when what you really feel is not agreement, but grief. You look around, work, family, friends, systems, and you see it everywhere, the applause for adaptation. How quickly we celebrate those who adjust, who keep the peace, who smile through compromise. But what happens when that applause becomes a muzzle? When everyone is thinking it, but no one says it, that's not harmony. That's pluralistic ignorance. A whole group pretending to believe something because they think everyone else does. And so the silence grows, like moss over truth, like static in a room full of knowing, like sleepwalking through a life that was never quite yours. You remember being younger, braver maybe, or just less practiced. You spoke from the belly then. You cried when you needed to. You asked why without shame. But somewhere along the way, the signals shifted. You learned to read the room before you read your own needs. You learned to modulate your tone, to soften your opinions, to frame honesty as suggestion, to cloak discomfort in humor. You learned that truth makes people flinch, and so you tucked it away. You learned to speak like a diplomat, polished, cautious, clean. You told partial truths. You wore masks, not because you were dishonest, but because you were wise. You knew what was rewarded and what wasn't. And integrity wasn't, at least not publicly, at least not in meetings and group chats, in the careful choreography of approval. The irony is everyone is doing it. Everyone is waiting for someone else to go first, to name the thing, to say this doesn't feel right, to whisper, is it just me? But no one wants to risk exile. So everyone plays along. This is the wound that rarely bleeds. The moral injury of staying silent when you know what's true, of smiling while your integrity sits alone in the corner, of clapping for something that breaks your heart just because no one else is sitting down. And you feel it, not as guilt, but as ache, a subtle misalignment, a breath you can't quite catch, and eventually it becomes too much. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, undeniable way. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't touch. Because the truth, your truth, is pressing against the dam. And even though it would be easier to keep swallowing it, you start to wonder what it would feel like to stop, to speak, to stay seated, to pause the performance, even just once. And so one day, you do. You say it in the meeting. You bring it up at dinner. You ask the real question instead of the polite one. And the room goes quiet. No applause, no immediate agreement, just stillness. And yet, your breath comes back. You didn't win. You didn't fix it. But something real happened. You met yourself again. And that is no small thing. It's terrifying at first. The echo of your own voice unarmored, the absence of instant validation, the risk of being misunderstood. But then comes something else, relief. The kind that lives in the bones. The kind that says, I didn't abandon myself today. Because integrity is not about being perfect. It's not about being right. It's about being aligned with what you know, with what you value, with what your body whispers, even when your mouth is afraid. And maybe the world won't reward that. Maybe you won't be promoted for it. Maybe you'll feel lonelier before you feel freer. But your breath will thank you. Your sleep will deepen. Your spine will soften. Your reflection will nod back, not with pride, but with peace. You're not here to perform. You're not here to conform. You're not here to make everyone comfortable. You're here to be real. And realness is rebellion now. Not loud, not reckless, but steady. A quiet refusal to keep disappearing in exchange for acceptance. You may lose things, people, positions, platforms, but what you gain is the self you've been longing to return to. The one who doesn't need applause to feel worthy. The one who doesn't twist to fit every room. The one who can say, that doesn't feel right to me, and stay standing even in silence. Because alignment is not always loud. Sometimes it's a candle in a gust. Sometimes it's a single word. Sometimes it's the stillness of choosing not to laugh when the joke is cruel. You don't need a revolution. You just need a moment of truth, a moment of breath, a moment when you take your own hand and say, we're not betraying ourselves again. Not here, not tonight. You leave your shoes at the door of that truth. Enter barefoot, soft, open. You light the candle, not for them, for you. And you let it burn quietly. As the rest of the world keeps spinning louder, faster, more, you burn steady. And though the world may not clap for your honesty, your breath will. And that sound, your own alignment, begins to feel like home. There comes a moment when the scaffolding of certainty no longer feels like shelter. You lean back against beliefs that once held the weight of the world, and they no longer bear you. They groan not from strain, but from irrelevance. Like old wood, too brittle to carry what you've become. This is not the storm. This is the exhale after the storm. The rain has gone, but the soil is still soaked. And you are tired. Not defeated, not broken. Just tired. There's a weariness that arrives when the mind has run every loop, when arguments dissolve, in the wash of silence, when cleverness bows to something humbler. Not humiliation, but humility. The kind that lifts its hands and says, I don't know. I never did. You were taught to be sure, to hold opinions like shields, to keep answers sharp, ready for anyone who might dare to question you. But something in you is softening now. Not because you've lost, but because the war no longer matters. The mind, tight as a fist for so long, starts to uncurl, not in triumph, but in surrender. A surrender, not to defeat, but to rest. There's a rope around your chest you didn't know was there, pulled taut by years of needing to be right, to know, to control the outcome by understanding the parts. But now, with each breath, that rope loosens, one thread at a time. The tension in your neck unwinds, your jaw softens, your shoulders drop as if gravity just remembered them. Maybe you don't need to fix the whole sky to sleep beneath it. There's something holy about doubt when you stop running from it. Not confusion, not fear, just the spaciousness of not knowing. Like standing before a vast sea at dusk and realizing it's okay not to chart every wave. What if truth is not an answer, but a way of being with the question? Not a destination, but a practice. The ancient stones in your mind, those proud, chiseled thoughts, those immovable convictions begin to weather in the rain, not eroded by argument, but softened by time, by breath, by the soul's longing to lay down its armor. You don't have to convince anyone anymore, not even yourself, especially not yourself. The paradox arrives quietly. The more you admit you don't know, the more you begin to understand. Not facts, not details, but the shape of the thing. The quiet truth beneath all the noise. You are not a problem to solve. You were never meant to carry it all. You were meant to feel, to wonder, to get it wrong and still be worthy of love. This isn't the end of thinking. It's the beginning of deeper listening. To the body's tired wisdom, to the pulse behind the question, to the ache that doesn't need explanation. Your breath is wiser than your arguments. Your sigh knows more than your solutions. There's something so brave about softening, letting the edge dull, letting the brow unfurrow, letting the breath be ragged but real. And in that soft collapse, something beautiful emerges. You notice the quiet between thoughts, the pause between heartbeats, the stillness behind the striving. No more gripping, no more defending. Just this, the unknowing that doesn't threaten you anymore. Maybe not knowing is a kind of coming home. The world is still complicated. People still misunderstand. Contradictions still dance in every corner. But your need to resolve them has grown quiet. You are allowed to be unsure. You are allowed to begin again. You are allowed to rest here in this strange, gentle honesty. Not every tension must be untied. Some knots are made to hold things together. Some questions are sacred for never being answered. So sit, lay down the sword of knowing. Let your hands be empty, your heart uncertain, your mind a wide sky with no map. And as you do notice, your body begins to believe you. It no longer prepares for the next offense. It no longer scans for debate. It begins simply to be. You do not need to be correct to be complete. You do not need to be certain to be safe. You do not need to know everything to deserve the peace of this moment. You have nothing left to prove, only everything left to feel. And as the walls soften, what's left is not emptiness, but space. Space to feel, to wonder, to begin again. There are truths that do not shout. They do not arrive in lightning. They wait quiet as moss on stone tender, as breath on glass. They wait for you to grow quiet enough to feel them from the inside. Not facts, but resonances. Not instructions, but invitations. Tonight you do not chase understanding. You let it arrive like a remembered song. It was never gone, just buried beneath the performance, beneath the practiced smile, beneath the stories you told yourself to feel safe. There is no shame in the mask. It served you once. It made sense. Armor is not a failure. It's a kindness offered to a younger self who thought the world required pretending. But now you're here. And something within you, something tired of pretending, wants to meet what's real. Not what's perfect. What's real? The mirror doesn't lie tonight. But for the first time, you don't flinch. You don't rearrange. You don't brace. You just see. And what you see, that tender, wild, aching self, is not broken, not wrong, not shameful. It's you, the real you, before the filters, before the proof, before the bending to be believed. You stand before yourself with no audience, and in that sacred silence, you don't perform. You remember. The memory is not of a time or place, but of a feeling. The feeling of belonging to yourself. There is no judgment in this room, only noticing, only breath. You speak inside your own heart, and this time you listen. Hello, you whisper to the shadow, and it doesn't growl back. It doesn't resist. It sits beside you, grateful to be seen. It never wanted to be your enemy, only your signal, only the part of you that held the pain when no one else could. And now, you hold it. You hold yourself, not with conditions, not with corrections, with compassion, not the sweet kind only, but the fierce, steady kind that refuses to abandon you, the kind that says, You can stay. Even this part. Even now. Self-compassion is not weakness. It is reclamation, a reuniting with every exiled piece. You were never too much. You were never not enough. You were only learning how to carry what was heavy with hands that were still growing. And now, those hands open. Not to grasp, but to welcome. You let in the parts you thought disqualified you. The ones you tried to outrun. The ones you labeled wrong, dramatic, too sensitive. But they were only honest. Only hurt. Only waiting to be heard. Tonight you hear them. Not to fix, but to know. To integrate. This is what wholeness feels like. Not a victory lap. Not a solved puzzle. But a quiet reunion. A soft remembering. There's no need to justify your softness. No need to apologize for your sensitivity. No need to prove your progress. You are not a product. You are a pulse. And every beat is allowed. The parts of you that once hid in shame now sit in the candlelight, visible and safe. And something in you deep steady starts to trust. Not because everything makes sense, but because not everything has to. Authenticity is not the absence of contradiction. It is the willingness to be whole, to be all of it, even the parts still healing, even the truths that come in whispers. The inner critic grows quiet tonight, not silenced by will, but soothed by love. You no longer argue with yourself. You understand. You are not your defenses. You are the one who outgrew them. You are the one who survived them. You are the one who gets to set them down. Not all at once. Not forever. But here now, just enough to breathe freely again. Let the mirror be gentle. Let it show you not what you should be, but what you already are. Not a perfection, a presence. And in that presence, there is truth. Not the sharp kind, not the punishing kind. The kind that holds your hand and doesn't let go. You belong. Not because you've proven anything, but because you exist. You are not waiting for permission. You are remembering your place, here, inside your own skin. Let it be home again. There was never a monster, only a mirror. And now, even your reflection seems to exhale. It was never about escaping. It was about returning. Not to the noise, not to the past, but to the quiet place within that never asked you to be anything more than real. You remember now the house in the fog. How you stood at its door, hands trembling, with questions, searching for proof that you belonged inside. You thought clarity meant certainty. You waited for the fog to lift completely, for sharp lines, clean answers, permanent peace. But peace didn't come from knowing. It came from staying in the fog long enough to feel the warmth from inside the house. Not through vision, but through presence. Not because the fog left, but because you stopped needing it to. You are not outside yourself anymore. You are not knocking on your own door. You are inside. The light is low, soft as candle flame, and the walls breathe with you. This is what clarity becomes when it no longer demands perfection, a softness, a steadiness, a home. The illusions, they were not your failure. They were your shelter. They kept you warm when the truth felt too sharp. They gave you time. Every distortion was a teacher. Every mask a placeholder for something tender that hadn't yet learned how to speak. And now, you listen. The voice is quiet, but it no longer hides. It speaks not in declarations, but in rhythm. In the breath that moves without permission. In the heartbeat that has always known the way. You once thought you needed to be whole to be loved. But you were always whole, and you were always loved, even in pieces, especially in pieces. You are not becoming someone else. You are returning to the one who never left, the gentle self, the one behind the performance, the one behind the striving, the one behind the pain. There's no rush. There never was. Integration is not a final step. It's a rhythm, a remembering, a forgetting, a returning, again and again and again. You do not need to stay perfect to stay true. You only need to stay close to yourself. The path is not linear. There are days the fog thickens again, nights when the mirror blurs, moments when the old defense returns just to ask if you still need it. And you respond with grace, not judgment, not panic, just presence. I see you, you say. And in being seen, even the fear softens. This is how clarity lives now, not as a fixed view, but as a friendship with your own depth. You are not chasing stillness anymore. You are becoming it. You do not resist the tide. You float. You do not demand light. You become it in quiet, ordinary ways, in how you speak to yourself when no one is listening, in how you hold your breath without shame, in how you touch your own shoulder and mean it. You are not your past, but your past is welcome here. You are not your wounds, but they belong to a story that deserves gentleness. Everything that was fractured has been gathered, not erased, but integrated. The fog was never the enemy. It was protection. It was the veil that gave you time to grow eyes gentle enough to see your truth without flinching. And now, you see, not all at once, not everything, but enough. Enough to trust, enough to rest, enough to stop proving. There is no final chapter, no tidy ending. Only this, a breath that no longer fights itself, a self that no longer fears its own reflection. And the house, it is warm from within. The fog still drifts outside the window, but it doesn't matter anymore. You've made it home. Not because the world is certain, but because you've stopped needing it to be. Let it be uncertain. Let the edges blur. Let the questions live. This is not confusion. This is grace. And you're allowed to rest in it, not because you finished, but because you've arrived, right here, right now, with nothing left to fix and everything left to feel. The fog was never the enemy. It was a kindness. And now, with the light returning, you don't need to see everything. Just enough. Just this.